Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. You are now waiting for Ron. I am Jay Houston. We got Corey Leventhal down below, Justin Pena in the top left. Today, we're actually going to be waiting for Sky Nelson, who wrote the book Living in Flow, and we'll dive into his ideas on free will and what he calls synchronicity in a moment.
All right. You guys excited?
Yeah, got our first guest here. It's going to be dope. Oh, the full Joe Rogan podcast headphones, little Sennheiser, $99, Amazon. I knew it was coming.
How about $74.99?
Wow, he's just a monster. Look at him, just dominating over here.
Great purchase, by the way. They are amazing.
Oh, I mean, the Sennheiser, so of course.
Yeah.
One of the leaders.
It's great value, you know.
Oh, yeah, max value. Oh, yeah.
What's up, guys?
Not much. What is the shirt you're wearing?
Space VR, baby.
Oh,
Space VR.
Compliments of Ryan. Yeah, we partnered with this company to do like VR with our zero body dry float. So you're floating,
and you're in
and you're looking like you're floating in space.
So the idea is
your body's weightless.
That's pretty cool.
It's to get. They have a patent on a VR headset in a float tank to deal with the salt and the water, right? So the idea is to give you the overview effect within 60 minutes by just going in a float tank rather than getting on a space shuttle. You know, it's an interesting idea. And so they partnered with us because we have the dry float, because it's impossible for them to take a float tank to a conference to show people at a demo. But we can take a zero body. So it's a really good partnership for us, you know.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Wait, so what's the difference between what does the zero body look like the dry float?
I'll show you a picture if you like.
Yeah, we got plenty of footage.
We got zerobody.com. This podcast is brought to you by CryoNext, global leaders in cryotherapy and wellness equipment, sales, services, and education.
Did you get a new chair, Justin?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, it looks comfortable, supportive.
Extra support, yeah.
Yeah, I like it. So yeah, that's what that thing looks like.
Gotcha. Feel like a waterbed almost.
Sort of, yeah.
It's like a deflated waterbed with a hydraulic platform that like lowers you into it, and then the sides like cover you up, so it looks like you're fully absorbed by the water.
And then the water is heated to your body temperature, so you don't feel anything.
Wow.
Has guided meditation and binaural beats built into the system for optional to put on headphones.
Yeah, I gotta try this out.
No, it's like convenient amplified meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Just take your shoes off. Don't have to get naked. Don't have to shower before. Don't have to shower after.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty sweet.
Going
and then
camping.
I watched that little, there's like a little blip of, I actually clicked on it because it was Elon talking to Lex Friedman about autopilot and what's going on there. And then he was like, at the very end was like, yeah, once we create this crazy AGI, what's the first question you're going to ask it? And he just pauses for like 20 seconds. He's looking around, doing his Elon thing. And then he's just like, what's outside the simulation?
Do you know why that's such an
ends the podcast?
Yeah.
Do you know
so good?
Do you know why that's such an amazing answer? Is because he answers that as if he already knows we're living in a simulation.
Yep.
He like that's not even a question. That's not the question. The question is what's outside of the simulation, which is like,
what's the
that
real
question?
That blew my mind.
It was incredible when I watched that. I was like, oh my god,
I know.
Elon.
What is outside the simulation?
We're probably somebody with a giant Neuralink helmet on, with no skull. Just
yeah, it keeps reminding me of that Rick and Morty episode where there's like the world inside of a world inside of the world, like producing energy for the world above them, and then
I think about the Life of Roy, or is that
that one too? Yeah,
they just like get
a video game of lives
his
life.
They're at a galactic arcade. He's like, "You went back to work at the carpet factory after you had cancer?" No, he's like, I'm going off the grid. It's so good.
It's a great show.
Good stuff.
Hey,
Hello.
Mr. Sky Nelson.
Hey, how are y'all doing?
Good.
Great. How are you?
Great, good to meet you.
Same to you.
How's California?
We're having great weather right now. Usually people say California is so beautiful and stuff, and usually it's not. Where I am. Usually it's kind of colder and windier than it looks outside, but right now, last couple days, it's been really beautiful. So,
Cool.
how about you all?
It's rainy here in Atlanta.
Yeah.
83 and sunny here in Orlando.
And I'm
As
up
usual.
in Chicago, and it's 39, but it feels like 28 with a little bit of wind. It's a little
Well,
chilly.
we got the
Just
spread.
4 seasons.
Yeah,
That's
right.
cool. Good stuff.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, I know you only have an hour.
How'd you guys all meet?
It's a good question. So I guess I met.
Jay and I, yeah,
Yeah, you guys start because
Jay and I are original college roommates. So we have known each other for
Cool.
15 years. Yeah, best man at my wedding. And then he moved to Chicago. I moved to Chicago, moved in with him again. We've lived together a couple times throughout our life. So
When was the best man wedding experience?
2018, October of 2018.
cool.
So not too long ago.
Congratulations,
Yeah, thank you.
Very recent.
and I joined the group not too long ago, about last year.
About a year. Yeah. We met Justin through like a marketing group that we are part of, and then somebody from that marketing group was like, "Hey, I'm running. I know this guy who can help with like LinkedIn marketing, things like that." And I
Nice.
was like, "Oh, perfect."
Nice.
And, now we've just tapped Justin for every project we possibly can. Now it's great.
Justin's got a lot of skills and enthusiasm.
Absolutely.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm excited to get to share with you anything that's interesting to you about my book or my writing or whatever's piqued your interest to talk. I'm happy to talk about all aspects.
Yeah.
Sure.
So let's jump
Is my
right
lighting
in.
going to be okay for you? It's a little awkward, but I can adjust it if you want me to.
I think you're
I
good.
think it's fine.
Okay.
Cool.
Oh, I'm actually logged in as my wife. Let me change my name there.
I was gonna say Dana.
All sorts of crazy logistics these days, huh?
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go.
So I think Corey and Jay know, but the way I met Sky was at a conference a couple years ago. It was the Science of Consciousness conference.
Mhm.
And I went there completely, randomly. Like I had this feeling like I wanted to go see Arizona. So I booked a ticket to Phoenix, Arizona. Then about a week before my flight, I was looking up what to do in Arizona during that week that I'll be there. And then the first result on Google was the Science of Consciousness conference down in Tucson. So I was immediately like, yes, that's definitely what I want to do. So when I get to Phoenix, I drive down to Tucson, about a 2-hour drive, and then get into the conference. And that's, I'm hearing all these speakers talk about really interesting things. But the one thing that really resonated with me was, all these coincidences were happening to me in my life. Like being at that conference was in my mind a coincidence.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. So then I remember talking to Deepak Chopra about it, and he was like, "Oh yeah, there's this whole field of like synchronicity," and that was the first time I ever heard the word synchronicity. And then I was talking to more people in the conference, and they're like, "Oh, you should talk to Sky. He's doing a lot of work in synchronicity." And
I think it's brilliant that the first time you heard of synchronicity was in an actual conversation with Deepak Chopra.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Not
epic.
a lot of people get that.
Yeah, and I took him aside. We did he hosted a live meditation, and then at the end, I just kind of like followed the group that was with him, like asking him questions. And then when it was my turn to ask him questions, I was like, "How do you explain, coincidences and stuff?" And synchronicity.
Speaking of synchronicity, it's a great time for us to define it for people listening.
Yeah.
Would you mind doing that for us, Sky?
No, I'm happy to. So a synchronicity is a meaningful coincidence. The way that I describe it, which is a little more specific, Carl Jung did some of the original coining of the term and the description of his view of it. And he incorporated a lot of different aspects, like it could be dreams, something you see in your dreams that relates to something that happens in life, or it could be someone you meet, or, he had examples of symbols that appeared that reflected the conversations he was having with his clients. So symbolism, it's a language of symbolism. But let me get more specific. And the way that I look at it is a synchronicity is a experience that is meaningful because it leads to an experience that you're seeking to have. So you may consciously or unconsciously be wanting to find out more about the coincidences you're experiencing, and you find yourself at this conference and speaking with Deepak Chopra, and that's a synchronicity, which, or maybe finding the article in the newspaper that said that there was this conference happening was the synchronicity, which led to the experience you were seeking to have, which was talking with Deepak Chopra and getting that information. So it's like, we want to look at it in order of time. There's something that happens right now, which seems a little bit out of place, or I don't quite know where it fits in my life, like finding an ad for a conference that you're in town for, but you follow it, and then you find out it leads exactly to an experience that you were wanting to have, which is finding out more about these types of experiences.
Mind blown. Mind blown.
Yeah, so I guess naturally is like, where's the line between meaningful coincidence and just a coincidence? Like what's the difference between a synchronicity and a coincidence?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, one of the things that I really emphasize in my work is not to be looking for really amazing, profound moments that are synchronistic. Synchronicities show up in small ways, and they show up as negative experiences too. So what's really happening, I think, is that the cosmos that we live in is responsive. And this is a big theme right now. I mean, in website development, 10 years ago, I was working in software, and we were dealing with responsive programming to the websites. And, you know, we're realizing, and with the advent of the internet, we're all more responsive more quickly to each other with social media. And it turns out the universe, it seems to be responsive as well. What I mean by that is when you take an action, you have a reason for taking that action. You have an underlying feeling or experience that you want to have. So when you clean your room, you're actually cleaning it because you have the experience of wanting to feel more organized when you get back to work later. It's the experience that you're seeking, which is guiding the response that the universe brings us. Using that word universe, but what sort of vaguely, what I really mean is it's guiding the likelihood of a coincidence that shows up, which helps you experience that thing. So if you're seeking to experience more peace in your relationship with your parents, that may come in the form of, you know, losing your wallet while you're out with your mom or dad and getting in a big argument about it. But it brings up some old patterns, and in that process, you are able to act differently about it. And it turns out that you have the experience you were seeking to have, which is a better relationship with your parent, because of this synchronicity, which is losing your wallet. So synchronicities can be negative things or challenges or obstacles as well. And it's really important to see it that way so that you're seeing how your life is actually a one steady stream of one synchronicity after another. And your job is not to try and figure out which ones are real synchronicities and which ones are just chance. Your job is more to just start looking for the meaningful threads in your life. How do I take advantage of the opportunities that are before me? And how do I see certain things that look like obstacles or irrelevant? How do I see what meaning they might actually have for me?
Sky, are you familiar with the reticular activating system in the brain?
I've heard that, but you'd have to explain it to me.
It's basically like your brain is a filtration device, right? So if you buy a white Tesla, guess what you're going to start seeing everywhere? Confirmation
bias.
Yeah, something like that. It's basically that, like, you'll find whatever you're looking for, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like there might be some similarities here with that.
Well, I do go into, in one of the appendices to the book, Living in Flow, I try and address that question. The challenge is not to say that that doesn't exist. That absolutely exists. When we are aware of something, we're going to see it more often. What happens, though, in the realm of debate around synchronicity is people who are skeptics, they say that when you buy a white Tesla, you will start to see more white Teslas. And they say that that concludes that synchronicity is not a fact, or it doesn't happen. So both are true, I think. It is true that there is such thing as confirmation bias, and we are going to be more likely to agree or believe in something that we expect. And that doesn't explain the experiences that I've had and that I've talked to others about and gathered stories. And I think it also, I don't want to rely just on personal anecdotal experience either. What the real question is, the current, if we say confirmation bias explains all synchronicity, then what we're saying is the theory we have is good enough to explain everything we know. And what I would suggest is, if we have a better theory that makes more sense in other areas of physics and science as well, and it explains synchronicity to some extent, then that would be beneficial overall. So the way I've approached it is to try and answer some of the outstanding questions in fundamental physics, like what is space and what is time, how does quantum field theory and what are the weaknesses and the flaws in those theories, and try and develop a better fundamental theory of basic physics and show that it leads to the possibility for synchronicity. And then we just have a better theory overall, and we don't actually feel inclined to try and discount our synchronicities.
You mentioned that you had some personal experiences with synchronicity, and I don't want to only solely rely on those, but I would love to hear them if you could share.
Yeah, stories are really good because it sort of grounds people with idea of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you like one really big story that I keep coming back to this story every time I try and really question whether or not synchronicities are just, random chance or is there something to it.
Yeah.
But I was about 20 and I was traveling around Europe, backpacking, taking a semester off school in college. And I had a good friend who was also in that part of the world, staying in Israel, and she was on a study program there. And so we were like, hey, we're going to be in the same part of the world. Let's meet up somewhere. Where should we meet? Well, Greece was awesome. Like, we wanted to meet in Greece. It had beaches and it was warm and it was halfway between where we were going to be. I was in Spain. I was in Italy.
Sounds great.
She was in Israel. So we had this plan, but this is in the 90s. We didn't have cell phones. We did have email, but not very often. Stopping at an internet cafe for me was very difficult. So I ended up not calling her, and she was waiting for my call. And I ended up on my way through Italy, on the way to Greece, I got sick and had to head home. My flight was out of Paris. So I switched my plans to go to Paris, and I was going to call her as soon as I could, but I hadn't called her yet. And I was going to fly home the next day from Paris. Meanwhile, she got sick of waiting for me, and her friends synchronistically invited her to go to Paris for the weekend to go to Fashion Week. And it's not that far from Israel, so might as well take advantage of it. So she goes to Paris and almost says no because she's afraid she'll miss my call. But in Paris, we both went to the same museum, the Louvre, the biggest museum there, biggest tourist attraction. And I'm walking through the Louvre Museum in the 24 hours I had before my flight, and I stop dead in my tracks, and I look, and there's this person that looks just like my good friend. And it was her. And so we met by accident in the Louvre in Paris when we were trying to meet in Greece and didn't have a fixed plan, but had definitely communicated about that.
Sky, this happens to me all the time. I think she might have been stalking you, my friend.
Well, it worked because
oh my God, what a coincidence! You're in the Louvre. I don't know.
it worked because we're married now, and
that's a great story.
Awesome.
So that's Dana.
I've actually looked at the statistics of each of those steps and tried to calculate. Each of those pieces can be looked at from an odds perspective. Yeah. And even under the best, most generous circumstances, you have like less than a 5% chance that would be explainable by just chance. And so I'm just looking for a better explanation. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying the current explanation isn't really very good.
I can't help but apply this idea to my own life. Like, as I hear you speak and as I read about it, and there's a couple different ideas that I'm gonna have to really process with this information before I can share it. But this is really interesting stuff.
I can tell you another story just because.
Hell yeah, bring it on.
It's helpful to see the different ways this can work.
Yeah.
So here's a more down-to-earth example that might be more applicable on a daily basis. I went back to graduate school, and I was commuting every day about 2.5 hours by bus to get there. And I really liked being in the program. I was working with physicists, students, and really enjoyed that environment. And they had this social thing, which was like a camping trip to a observatory where they go overnight, spend the night, and look up at the stars at the night. And I was like, that sounds awesome, but I had a kid, and it's 2.5 hours away from my house to get to school. It's just going to be too hard through traffic and all that to make it work. So I put off even finding out about it. And finally, like 3 days before the event, somebody asked me, so are you going on the trip? And I said, well, no, because it's so far away, but where is it actually happening? I actually took the time to ask at that point. And they said, well, it's going to be at this Redwoods Park, so-and-so. And I was like, oh, that's like 10 minutes from my house. So it turns out I hadn't gotten all the information that I needed. Turns out they were driving all the way up to see me, basically, and go camping right next to my house. So immediately I was like, yeah, I can go. That's great. So I went to this event. I was about to go to the event, and I found out that my daughter's was invited to a birthday party the next day. And I was bummed because I was going to bring her along, and now we had this conflict. And again, but this time I decided I'm going to ask, like, okay, well, where's the birthday party? And they said, well, the birthday party's at the park at the Redwoods. And it's like a 5-minute walk down the path from the campground. So we ended up having this great weekend, and it's a good thing I asked because I was able to go to the overnight and then walk down the hill to the birthday party, and it all just flowed. This is where the idea of flow comes in. When we pay attention to the alignment of all these events in our lives, we're able to get into flow more readily.
Cool. Sky, I got to ask, before the concept of synchronicity was like introduced into your life, what were your beliefs on free will up until that point? Did you go through different phases? You know, were you deterministic? What can you give us some background on that?
That's a good question. So one of the early experiences I had trying to understand this, because that's really the question that bugged me. I would have like, you know, sort of two areas of my life I was really interested in. I wanted to play music as a career, and I also wanted to do this kind of research on physics and relativity and the things that were interesting to me and had been interesting for a long time. And on a given night, like I'd have a choice. There'd be an open mic kind of jam event that I could go to and participate in with friends, or I could stay home and continue on my work, my reading, which I really enjoy. And I really struggled and have always struggled with that kind of choice. Like, I can see what I'm going to lose in each circumstance, and what I'm going to gain is kind of in the background. So either decision seems painful. Like, I don't want to miss out, you know, fear of missing out. So, but what I noticed, I started to like document my thinking around this. And one night I went out to this open mic, and I had this really incredible experience playing and connecting with these friends. And I felt really connected to these people afterwards. And I thought, God, if I hadn't have done that, what a bummer. Like, that was like part of my fate right there. But then another night I stayed home and I researched, and I made huge progress and learned something I had never understood before, and thought, well, what if I had gone out that night? Like, that was part of my fate too, to be home. So I realized it can't be true that I'm just guessing my fate perfectly. It must be that the world is actually wrapping itself around my choices. My choice comes first, and then the situations show up to respond to that. And that's the way that I started to understand the idea that like fate follows free will. And it was able to allow me to not have the conflict of destiny and free will and all those things. Like, am I choosing this, or is this happening to me?
Just for the sake of argument alone, let's take, for instance, that, you know, we have no free will. Just for the sake of argument at this point, right? Let's just say that we don't. Let's assume that everything is already laid out for us, and the things that are happening to us before an event, we're just trying to map to that event. Does that make sense? So maybe we're just trying to find patterns in the chaos that are already laid out for us. Does that make sense? Isn't that kind of like what synchronicity would be?
Yeah, and that's like the model that I use essentially. What I want to point to is the map that you're talking about, like that you're trying to find your way on, is a tree.
Okay.
It's not just a flat map that you're trying to walk through. It's a branching tree. So every possibility moves outward from where you are now. And some of those branches have the thing you want. We call it an apple, just as a metaphor.
Yeah.
And some of them don't. And so then the question is all about, how do you navigate that path? And the way you navigate it is obviously by dealing with what happens to you, what comes your way. Right? You're faced with choices every day.
Yeah.
That are difficult usually.
Yeah.
And so by developing some wisdom and I think some skills around how synchronicity works, how it responds to your own choices, understanding where your choices are coming from. If you're coming from a place of optimism, or you're coming from a place of self-defeatism, like those kinds of things influence how you make choices and what opportunities you end up getting to along that path. But the destiny is not a single destiny. It's any one of a number of different possible ways that it could look. And I really think it's important to pull out away from the content of your life and look at the context. What are you learning? What are you feeling? What's your evolution about? And how does, you know, a given on a given night, you'll experience a specific set of circumstances, which is neither here nor there, but it's serving a higher sort of pattern that you're trying to develop in your life.
Okay. This is a great time for you to really dive into flow a little bit more, like, and how we can apply it to our lives on a daily basis. Right. So like when you say flow, does that mean I'm supposed to be in a positive state of like love and giving and joy as much as possible, as opposed to like fear, anxiety, stress, things like that, and just lean towards that end of the spectrum? And that means I'm going to go down a better path. Is that what you mean?
Good question. Flow is another way to look at flow is resilience. It's how well you deal with this disruption in your life. Because the world is going to constantly bang on you and pound on you to try and disrupt you from what you think you're doing in your head, what your plans are for how you want your life to go. And it's doing that because it's trying to show you a path to what you really, really want, not what you think you're trying to accomplish. So I think I'm trying to build my business and double my revenue, right? But what I'm really trying to do is gain a greater sense of satisfaction, greater teammanship in my collective, all those things that I'm really after as a human being. Those are the things that synchronicity are going to try and pull me towards. And so flow is not about going for a certain positivity versus a negativity. It's about becoming more authentic, understanding what's really going on inside of you, and being able to, I think when we start to peel back those layers, I think you said it earlier, the filters that we have, which sort of color our experience, when you start to peel those back, we naturally start to discover a sense of joy, a sense of awe and wonder underneath those. So we don't have to go out like trying to just be joyful and reject disappointment. Rather, flow is about embracing all of those experiences. And when we do that, we naturally become more alive. And it's really a sense of aliveness that we want. We don't want to feel happy. We want to feel really alive.
I have to bring this up. This is completely kind of a tangent, but I'm not very religious, but I would definitely consider myself spiritual. But I heard a sermon a while back of someone talking about being graced with humiliation, right? Because being humiliated, it's almost as what you're saying kind of aligns with that, right? Because it's kind of pushing you towards what you really want.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I've had the experience of being pretty isolated a lot of my life, like for various reasons, choosing to sort of work alone, not very good at working on a team, on projects. I sort of have my own vision for my projects. And it's really a hard practice for me because I really have learned how much I want to be more connected. So I feel isolated and bummed about that, but I have habits that make me remain isolated, independent. I just want to be super independent in my life, but that actually isn't what I deeply want. And so synchronicities which show up, which are painful, but humiliate me or make me feel more connected, if that's the end result, are going to be beneficial on my path for what I really want at a deeper level.
Cool.
And so the idea that I phrase it as is anticipated qualitative experience. I think that we're constantly anticipating the experiences we want to have. And sometimes we don't consciously know that. We're like, I'm anticipating that I'm going to be let down by somebody because I'm used to being let down and I sort of believe that's what's going to happen. This is where beliefs can become very important. And so then my anticipation is I'm anticipating the experience, what it feels like to be let down on a project. And what I suggest is that anticipation of that experience is going to make it more likely that a synchronicity shows up, which brings us to that experience. The person ends up getting sick or having another obligation that pulls them away from the project, and I feel let down. And that's a random event, but it's meaningful because it leads to the experience that I was anticipating. So it's important to pay attention to what we're feeling inside. I think feelings are an important part of the world that we live in, not just some abstract thing that's happening, that we should just push away from our work life. Feelings are guiding our choices constantly. And when we anticipate experiences based upon feelings we don't want to have, like I don't want to feel shame, so I'm going to try and just avoid shame at all costs, I'm probably going to be more likely to bring about experiences that make me, have that experience.
Yeah.
A lot of that I would say is a bit postulated. Like I don't have all the evidence for that aspect of it, but yeah, go on.
So what are some common misconceptions that people might have, when it comes to like living in flow? Where if I want to make sure that I understand it correctly. So what would be something that most people find confusing?
I think most people feel like flow is something that should feel good all the time, or when they're not in flow, they should feel bad about it. And I think flow is really about feeling fully alive, feeling all the aspects of who you are. If you're in flow and somebody around you dies or gets sick, you're going to be really able to feel that and go into that experience 100%, because that's where the flow is leading you. And flow, I think, is nature's way of helping us get to our next level. I think about this as a sort of a video game metaphor. We're trying to get to our next level of accomplishment, our next level of growth. And flow is this way in which events show up in our life to help us do that. A lot of times, if I've got some block, and I want to heal that block, I want to get to my next level of leadership. That means dealing with my own insecurity at a deeper level. So I'm going to be forced to confront that insecurity. I'm going to have some situation arrive in my life which makes me feel insecure in exactly the ways that I feel insecure.
So what are some telltale signs that I'm not living in flow? How can I apply that?
For me, what I look for is stress.
That's a good one.
So
if you're yeah. Okay.
It's not like I'm saying if you're stressed, you're bad. I'm saying if you're stressed, you are not handling things to the level that you could. And for myself, I'll speak for myself. I want to be able to handle a lot of things in my life well. And that means not having the same level of stress that I have about each thing along the way. I have to get better at being able to navigate those experiences. And stress really comes from an internal experience, right? So I feel stressed about my book deadline because somewhere inside I'm like criticizing myself that I should have started working on it, a month ago. Or if I don't succeed with it, then the worst possible scenario will happen and I'll be homeless on the street or something. And so the stress is an immediate indicator that I'm got an inner dialogue which is undermining my ability to actually do the work I want to do.
Man, I can't help apply this to my life in the last couple of years and just be like, oh man, it's so good. Thank you so much for sharing all this.
You're welcome.
Do you guys have any questions?
I guess, so that sounds like it leads to going back to that, the stress and, what are some key insights to know when you're not in flow? Is it sort of the sense of you're being inauthentic, or you're not, you're not being your true self, you have some sort of filter, and that's causing an imbalance?
Yeah. I think, for me, what I notice is there's just layers and layers of filters. So I might realize, oh yeah, I'm being sort of, I'm not taking advantage of opportunities to hang out with people, for instance. So I want to be more connected to people, but I'm actually saying no and turning down opportunities. So that's a filter. Why am I doing that? Why am I saying no? And then I sort of, with enough of those experiences, I decide how to handle it differently, and I start saying yes to opportunities. But then I find myself saying yes all the time, or saying yes to the wrong things that I'm not really interested in. And it's just another level of, okay, so why am I doing that? And why am I doing that? And I think flow is like this process. I think of the world as like this program that's running, that's bringing us more and more of what it is that we're dealing with at every moment. And so it's going to bring us situations that put us under stress, because those are the situations that transform us.
Yeah, absolutely.
It also seems like, could it be like a mindset thing too? Having those limiting beliefs that kind of, appear as, stressful situations. If we just switched our mindset to, being super optimistic about what we think we want, then would that lead to more positive synchronicities?
Well, I think that's great. I'd like to clarify that. For me, there's a reason that I'm not being optimistic. There's some message, like some program of response that I have to a situation that's making me feel like, oh, this is never going to work. I'm never going to reach this deadline, or, makes me feel bad about myself. So rather than just forcing myself to think positive thoughts, I find it really helpful to understand what are the thoughts I'm actually thinking, so that I can then, like, once I understand what I'm thinking, it sort of starts to dissolve. I go, oh, that's ridiculous. Why would I think I'm a bad person? Like, there's no reason to think that, because I'm actually, just made my daughter really happy by playing with her for a while. She doesn't think I'm a bad person, but here I am thinking I'm a bad person because I missed this deadline. Okay, well, what's really happening? I can sort of peel away that layer of self-talk, and then I naturally get to a more optimistic state of mind.
Sky, are you big on meditation?
Yeah.
What kind of meditation do you normally like to practice? Any mantras or anything like that?
I grew up in a house that my parents were meditators and were yoga practitioners. So from a really early age, I was exposed to those practices in the yoga tradition.
You said you were under, who was the teacher? The master?
Swami Satchidananda. Satchidananda.
It's a sick name.
Satchidananda.
Yeah. And his mantra, his logo was "Truth is one, paths are many." So it was just a spiritual environment in which we just kept being asked, like, what is the nature of the reality that you're experiencing, without a clear answer to that, or not a single answer. But the practice of yoga, of mental clarity, of understanding our reactions to things, and that work has really informed my own diving into my own mindset, and in the modern context. But that wasn't quite your question. What was your question?
No, that was, you answered it times 10. That was great. Getting away from like the spiritual side of it, can you talk about the role of synchronicity in terms of like science and scientific discovery?
Yeah. So the paper that I'm working on right now has to do with understanding space and time. And in quantum mechanics and things like quantum field theory, which come out of quantum mechanics, there's some fundamental gaps that have always been there. And one of those is time. We don't treat time the same way that we treat space. But we know from physics, from the relativity theory that Einstein created, that time and space are really part of the same thing from a mathematical point of view. So it's really difficult to understand how to treat time the same as space when you're dealing with quantum mechanics, because, like, think about how you think about time right now as a human being. You're going from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock to noon, through the day in a linear order. But you're not going through your house from the bedroom to the bathroom to the front door to outside. You can turn around and go back the other way, right? So you move around all over in space, but you only go in one direction in time. And so there's some real asymmetries in how we understand time differently from space. And those are buried into the theory that we have of quantum mechanics. So if you think about time, and let's just set that aside for a moment, the problem with synchronicity, trying to understand synchronicity, is that it is an event which is meaningful in the moment because it leads to an experience you're seeking to have in the future. So how is it that something in the moment can connect to something in the future? That's another question of time. So without going into too many details, you can see that understanding better how time, the nature of time, and if we can really have a theory of physics that is symmetric in our understanding of time with space, and that really we have the right foundation for the theory, then we would understand time better. And what that leads to is like a holographic representation of the world. Now, a hologram is a piece of film which has a pattern on it of scratches, like interference pattern, like waves. When you shine light through it, you see an image appearing there that looks three-dimensional. It could be like a face that you're looking at. And what's important about that is that there is a difference between the film itself, which is a layer of, actual interference pattern of light. And then the thing you're looking at appears to sort of float above the image. It's like a face that's floating in space, and it's three-dimensional when you shine light through it. So if you cut that hologram in half, you find that you still can see the whole image of the face in there by just looking at the right angle. It's like the image, the person's really there. You just have to look at the right angle through the film and you can still see them. So there's this way in which the whole image is present in every part of the film. And every part of the film can show you any part of the image. That's not true like in a postcard or a photograph. If you look at a postcard of Golden Gate Bridge, every point on the card corresponds to a particular point on the bridge. You tilt it, you don't see any change. But in a hologram, there's this all-to-one relationship. And it made me think of the world as kind of a matrix. Like there is this, what we see is actually only being presented to us in the moment that we see it. It didn't actually have an objective existence before we see it. So let's go back to the example of meeting my future wife at the Louvre Museum. The moment before I walked into that room, I would describe her in this model as an informational kind of being. Like she's represented by a branching tree of all the possibilities of where she could be. And only in that moment when I walk into the room does one of those possibilities actually fall into place. And then that reality becomes the one that I experience. And so there's this difference between what we are actually experiencing and what we're not experiencing. What we're not experiencing is not actually rendered for us on the screen of our experience or consciousness.
Got it. I got to bring this up. Are you familiar with Eric Weinstein and geometric unity?
I've heard his name.
Eric, definitely check this guy out.
Yeah.
He's basically saying there's something, like Einstein painted the canvas that Newton was operating on.
Mm-hmm.
And, we haven't had any advancement in like theoretical physics in the last 40 years. And he's saying it's because we're not creating the canvas that Einstein was operating on. And there's something called the observerse. A couple of years ago, he did a 3-hour lecture at Oxford, kind of blew the minds of like the institutions. And now he has a podcast called The Portal. I highly recommend checking it out.
Okay, I'll check it out. Yeah, thank you.
Maybe we'll have you on again. I want to talk about this for sure.
Yeah, so there's this concept of retroactive event determination. If you've ever heard of video gaming design, you'll know about optimistic synchronization, which is the way that gamers can synchronize their computer games in order to make sense of the virtual worlds. So if you and I are on opposite sides of the world and we're trying to create a single seamless virtual world, then I will be, I'm playing my computer game, which is on my computer right in front of me. And you might be across the world in Atlanta or even Adelaide, Australia or something like that, and have these major delays, lag times, and yet our games have to synchronize. And they do that by, my computer doesn't actually render your reality until the moment when I interact with you. So there's this uncertainty in the world. Anything that's not being actually seen by me as a gamer doesn't actually exist in the game, except as information, like bits of possibility that could be rendered if they're called upon. And that's a really excellent model of how I think the physical world works.
Yeah. Sky,
Wow.
do you think that there's any chance, or what are your thoughts on us being in a simulation?
I think that people tend to think about that in a certain way, like they think about the Matrix. There's somebody running the simulation, somewhere out there running the simulation. I think that the work that I'm doing is showing that we are literally in a hologram, that this quantum mechanics is the mathematics of a hologram to some extent. And so to me, that indicates that I think of the world more as a virtual reality training program.
Virtual reality training program.
And we're just learning. It's like
Yeah.
to learn, to show us a way, show us like why something is the way it is, maybe.
To get to our next level of accomplishment, of being fully alive. There's this, you know, if you could think back to the time in your life when you felt full of awe, you know, watching a sunset or a
Grand Canyon
born or Grand Canyon, you know, when you feel really fully connected to the mysteries of life.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's the kind of goal of the curriculum that we're running. And we're going through daily life in which we don't feel that way most of the time because we're dealing with mundane problems. And we're trying to find, why don't I feel that sense of awe at being alive right now? Being alive is this incredible gift. Why don't I feel awe about it? Why don't I feel wonder? I don't, because I feel some kind of stress or worry about my future or about how someone feels about me. And so it's a training program, I think, to help us see ourselves more clearly and peel back those layers of inauthenticity and become more authentic in our lives and experience the best that we can experience.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
What would you say that we are training for then? If this is all a training program, what is that next level? Like, when does somebody pop out and say, congratulations, you've done it. You've reached the maximum level. Continue on. Here's the next.
I actually think
part.
he just answered the question. I think that you kind of just answered the question, didn't you? It's like really to peel back the layers, right? It's like go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I think that if we think of like this simulation as a preparation for something else, I think that's the part of the problem.
Yes.
We're not trying to get somewhere else when we die and like then we're ready. I think that's part of the problem with religion. Like, I'm going to put off any responsibility for my own choices now because I'm just trying to get somewhere else.
You're in it.
The sooner we awaken ourselves now, the more time we get to live in that state before we die.
You're in it.
Yeah. Got it.
So
okay.
Heaven and hell is in your mind, and it's on earth right now.
Yeah, and you're filtering your experiences through your own layers of heaven and hell.
Yes, and you can ascend or descend.
And I go up and down all the time. Like one day I'll be more patient with my daughter, and another day I'll be less patient, and I'm like, oh, I'm back in my pattern here.
Yeah, no, I feel you. We talk about this all the time. Yeah. We really approach it from a mindset point of view.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's really where we tackle it. But tackling it from this point of view is really interesting for sure. It's a great perspective.
Well, coming back to the science of time, if we live in a virtual reality sort of environment, I don't take that too far, right? Like, I don't want to discount the reality of our experiences.
Yes.
They're very real.
Of course.
But if the world is not rendering itself until we need it to, then that means things even in the past, things that already happened, are still waiting to be sort of decided. Because if I'm going to go to the store, and I'm decided if I'm going to go to the store or the gym, but I'm really trying to meet somebody new who's going to influence my life, then my decision to go to the store or the gym can actually have a retroactive influence on whether that person goes towards the store or the gym. Not because I'm intending them to, but because that's the person that will benefit me as a synchronicity towards getting my own growth. So when I make a choice, I'm actually interacting with not the present moment, but a whole timeline. I'm interacting with a timeline in which this person yesterday decided they're going to go to the store instead of going to the gym, or they decided they're going to go to the gym or the store. And their choice yesterday becomes determined when I end up going to the store today.
And because time is purely subjective, right? Because we could all technically be experiencing time in a different way, but we just not know it, right? And that
it's subjective in the sense, that it's relational.
Yes.
That my reality is only like I'm a video game, like only what I'm experiencing.
Yes.
And your reality is what you're experiencing.
You literally just blew my mind there for a second. That's pretty cool.
And that's what happens in video game design. Like, you just have your world, and then it aligns with other people's worlds. And I think we need to start seeing the world that way, rather than thinking there's this objective reality that we're all trying to make sense of.
Yeah, at the same time, it really could be that load time. That's really
we're having the world that we need to experience for our own sake of growth. At least that's my experience, and I don't want to generalize it too much because other people have their own things they're dealing with. But it puts us in a position, I think, of much more power and influence over our choices if we start looking at, okay, what is this teaching me about my life and about my next way to up-level my growth and experience a better quality of life as a human being?
Yeah, absolutely. Sky, I feel like you're giving us a lot to process.
Oh yeah.
Guys, I feel like
Absolutely.
I'm going to have to play with this for a while. I'm going to have some questions for you in the future. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm curious, one more question for me. What do you like, what's your take on the time that we're in right now with, you know, the coronavirus pandemic, and
yeah, great
do
question.
you attribute any meaning to what's going on right now to your personal life or to mankind as a whole?
That's a great question. I absolutely think that we are not in, this is not a breakdown. It's working towards a breakthrough. We have needed something to shift us for a long time. I mean, there's so much that's not making sense about our world right now. So much so that it blows my mind that we could even be operating and functional with the amount of disconnect and frustration that people feel. And, you know, I can point to so many different things. Violence in our schools, you know, the climate change is a huge issue in my mind.
Yeah.
But I think it all comes back to choices that we make on how we relate to each other and how we relate to ourselves. So ultimately, if we made better decisions and weren't so reactive with our feelings, we'd be able to hammer out some of the details of how to deal with climate change in Congress. The reason we can't actually make progress is because people aren't really able to listen to each other at a deep level. People aren't, and I'm not able to listen when my spouse or my friend or my daughter like comes at me with a attack, let's say, you did this. You know, my natural inclination is my nervous system gets all up and starts to react. And so what I think we are all trying to do, and this is where the game is trying to teach us how to temper those reactions so we can get through the conflict and get to the place where we actually agree. So this is an opportunity where everybody is on the same page, paying attention in a way that has never happened before. And I think what we need to do is find new ways of relating to each other and new ways of relating to our life, new ways of relating to grief and disappointment, so that we start to make choices which grow positive change versus keep entrenching in conflict. And synchronicity shows up in just the right way to exacerbate the conflict so that we can see it a little better. So I do think of the COVID-19 pandemic or the coronavirus showing up in our lives as a great teacher, something that is showing us our weaknesses, showing us the ways in which we're not resilient, both as a society and as individuals. It's making our relationships that are weak even harder, and our relationships that are strong even stronger. And this is all a teaching, or it can teach us how to be more resilient and be more able to be more compassionate with ourselves and with each other so that we can actually make better long-term decisions as a collective.
Yeah, I love that.
Well said. Awesome. Sky, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the work you're all doing. It's really a great pleasure to talk with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, anything else?
Where can people go to find more out about you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I released the book, Living in Flow, The Science of Synchronicity and How Your Choices Shape Your World last year. I created a video course that teaches or reminds you certain practices and principles you can use in your daily life to integrate these ideas and see synchronicity in action, get back into flow. And you can find that at this website, the letter youtthrivehere.com/livinginflow. And all my stuff is available from my website, synchronicityinstitute.com. I've created an institute last year that has a collection of things that we offer. We're working on a video app, like a mobile app, to help you track synchronicity. I've got writing that comes out all the time. We've got some animated videos that explain some of these ideas in detail. So that whole constellation of things is available at synchronicityinstitute.com.
Awesome. We'll make sure to put that link everywhere. Awesome. Thank you so much, Sky.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great to meet you all.
This is
Let's
awesome.
do it again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Guy.
Thank you. See you later.
Take care.
Bye.
I should have asked him about this, Justin. Look at the synchronicity.
Yeah.
What
That
is
watermelon there.
the bubbly? We're both drinking bubbly watermelon
Watermelon
right now.
What
Yeah,
is
my
that?
sister got this for me.
is this a coincidence? You guys didn't talk about this?
I know. I was that you were on a
brought it
roll.
up, yeah.
As soon as you took the first sip, when you go and watch this back,
People
when
wouldn't even
Justin takes
believe
the
it.
first sip. You'll see my face go like. I look at them like, oh, but
that's
you're
lovely.
in the zone. You're in the zone, so I was like gonna pop in there, but I know I blew it.
Now we got to get sponsored by Bubbly.
Bubbly. All right, we'll shoot him a message.
Yeah.
All right, guys, I gotta get going. Thanks so much. This was definitely
That
hands
was
down.
awesome.
This is the best podcast I've ever done. This was amazing. It's awesome.
We love
Justin,
it.
We got to
great.
get the next guest.
Dude, that was awesome. All right, guys, bye.
All right. See you guys.
Catch you later.
Have a
Bye.
good weekend.
You too.